About 20 years ago, I went through a season of difficulty in my life, a real rough patch. Following that period of trouble, I began a research project. Originally, I set out to discover how men could maintain integrity in every area of their lives. But serendipitously, I discovered how people successfully manage a crisis. It was a very intensive year for me. I worked with a talent-laden team, and on this team we had a medical doctor, PhD psychologist, a therapist, a pastor, and me. Guiding us through it was a research and development specialist. We discovered what people who have a strong sense of peace and stability and belonging during any crisis, what they have in common. We conducted interviews with people in crisis. We talked to professionals helping people in crisis. We read and assessed their stories, and we held focus groups. Following a very intensive data analysis, our chief finding was a dynamic relationship with God and others was the key to stability during a crisis. Now, that's what we talked about in the last weekly dose of hope. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to go back and see that as a precursor to this video. That in and of itself was revolutionary for me. The ones who thrived during a crisis lived deeply connected lives. But there was another breakthrough. Our research took us one step further. We thought, if connections with God and other people, if that was the key, then how in the world do those connections become intimate and deep and vital and dynamic and core to core? Now, here is the real breakthrough. These people surviving and thriving a crisis allowed themselves to be seen, really seen. I thought that was a weakness. They had the courage to be imperfect. They were authentic with how the crisis was affecting them. They let go of who they thought they were and who others thought they should be in favor of who they actually were. In a word, they were vulnerable. Vulnerability birthed deep connections. The origin of their joy, their peace, their stability during a crisis was vulnerability. I hated the thought of vulnerability. That whole idea of becoming vulnerable and letting someone see the real, unmasked Jody Burgin, that was not appealing to me in the least. My response was, heck no, and I would just stress eat another donut to cope with things. To allow ourselves to be really seen is terrifying. However, as we expose our whole hearts, we feel alive. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It's our greatest sign of courage. The courage it takes to be vulnerable, to really reveal your heart, is one of the most daunting things we'll do, and yet one of the most rewarding things that we'll do. Vulnerability deeply connects you with God and others who can help. Now, vulnerability shows up in day-to-day dialogue. Just a couple of days ago, I was with a patient overwhelmed with the coronavirus, not being able to see her family, and failing health, all ganging up on her. And I said to this dear gal, I'm sad. I'm frustrated that you sit in such enormous misery every day. I'm here, but I don't understand why this is happening any more than you do. God knows. I don't know. But I'm here to be with you through this. I met this amazing 98-year-old World War II pilot. He was a pilot and commander of a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber. After the war, he developed this unlikely friendship with an African-American pilot who flew P-51 Mustang fighter planes. The P-51s flew cover for the B-17 bombers. The bomber pilot said of the fighter pilot, he had my six. In the military, got your six means I've got your back. 6 o'clock is that blind spot behind you. It's where you're the most vulnerable. So when someone says they got your six, it means they're watching your back, your most vulnerable place. And by extension, they expect you to have their back as well. So got your six describes the way that we look after one another. Solomon said it this way: two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. During any crisis, including the coronavirus crisis, you too can have a strong sense of peace and stability and belonging. Vulnerability is how you get there.